Yeah, hi folks. Now I didn't see all of Patrick Gower's documentary on hate speech, and I didn't have to realise it was just a propaganda piece for Ardern's new hate speech law. And it didn't take much to realise it was just a hit piece to brand all right-wing people as white supremacists. And in the following clip he even implies that Brenton Tarrant is a right-winger, even though he aligns himself with communist China, and he calls himself an eco-fascist who promotes green nationalism, and he rejects conservatism and capitalism. And you can see all that in the link below.
The terrorist had shown racist tendencies from an early age. He had been using the controversial website 4chan, a known breeding ground for white supremacists, since the age of 14. But the terrorist told the Royal Commission that YouTube played an even bigger role in his radicalisation. He said he was radicalised.
Now this propaganda for Ardern was funded by New Zealand On Air. It was funded by you, the taxpayer.
By YouTube.
That was a really important insight, that actually a very mainstream platform was the place that he found content that further reinforced his thinking and his radicalisation.
It's believed he had terrorism planned before moving to New Zealand in August 2017. We don't know exactly what videos he watches, but we do know he donates money to Stefan Molyneux, described by his detractors as a far-right propagandist. Molyneux circulated racist conspiracies unchecked on YouTube, and at his peak had nearly 1 million subscribers.
You know, I go to Poland, what is it, 99% white? I don't need any security, the streets are incredibly clean.
Yeah, now what's wrong with that statement? Now I could say the same thing about the monocultures of Korea and Japan, but for some strange reason they never get called Asian supremacists, do they?
In 2018, he arrives in New Zealand on a speaking tour with Lauren Southern.
Both of them have a huge audience online. They believe that multiculturalism is a threat to the Western white world. These are extreme YouTubers.
Molyneux and Southern supported some of the ideas behind the original The Great Replacement theory, expressing these views to YouTube's global audience.
The thing I want to talk about today is the Great Replacement. It
is the same conspiracy theory
Now, how can it be a conspiracy theory when we're witnessing it every day?
The thing I want to talk about today is the Great Replacement. The Great Replacement is a term coined by French writer Renaud Camus, referring to what he views as the irreversible overthrow of France and its culture by Muslim immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa. The Great Replacement is a very simple concept. You have one people, and in the space of a single generation, you have a different people. Despite various misrepresentations, Camus does not oppose current immigration policy out of racism or Islamophobia, but on the basis of the preservation of French traditions and culture. And though Camus has had his eyes set specifically on France, his concerns have been shared by many nationalist and identitarian movements all across Europe. But the real question that comes in now is there any evidence that a Great Replacement is actually occurring? Or is Camus just another instance of paranoid white panic? Is he just another racist xenophobe who deserves to be convicted of a hate crime in order to pay a €4,000 fine? Yeah, that actually happens in Europe. Unfortunately, much of the research on these issues is withheld from the public by European governments, or in many cases, stats on religion and ethnicity are never even procured in the first place. So within Europe, only the UK and Netherlands actually collect figures on ethnicity. But even then, UK Statistics Bureau measures net migration, in other words, the sum total of people entering and leaving the country, to create the false impression that the numbers are smaller than they actually are, and to play a numbers game that distracts from the real question of demographic changes over time. And also, in France, for example, a law dating back to 1872 forbids the official collection of data based on questions about race or religious beliefs. So yeah, people are very, very uncomfortable talking about this subject, which is why YouTubers like myself who can't get fired from their jobs have to do it. But despite all of these roadblocks, the stats that we do have access to paint a pretty clear picture. In 1993, 7% of the UK population was foreign-born, and 3.6% were foreign nationals. With the 2004 European Union enlargement and drastic shifts in immigration policy, those numbers rose to 13.5% and 8.9% in 2015. These populations are primarily of Indian, Pakistani, or African background, and as of today, it is estimated that 1 in 3 newborns in the UK are non-white British. And if these trends continue, white Britons will be a minority in their own homeland by 2066. And this is just a fact. Whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, you have to acknowledge that this is happening. Though there are no government statistics, Pew Research Center found that 2/3 of all migrants arriving in France are Muslim, and the International Journal of Environmental Science and Development found that today Muslims make up roughly 10% of the French population, compared to 0.6% in 1950. That is an insanely high growth rate. And with the disparities in birth rates, the non-Muslim population will continue to decline as the Muslim population multiplies in France well above the replacement rate. So simply based on these statistics alone and the current trajectory they are on due to government immigration policies, Camus' theory regarding France looks fairly sound. But France isn't even the biggest problem. The situation is probably the worst in Germany with Angela Merkel's open-door immigration policy. 1 in 5 people in Germany today are either foreign nationals or have a migrant background. And these populations are disproportionately represented in younger age groups. 36% of people under 5 have a migrant background. And Pew Research found that while Muslims made up about 5% of the German population in 2010, if the federal government continues to rely on open-door immigration from the Islamic world in order to keep their ever-declining German population stable, this percentage is sure to increase in the coming decades. Trends in Europe tell the same overall story. As the native European population dies out, migrant and Muslim populations are rapidly growing with higher birth rates and unfettered mass immigration. And with the median age of 32 for Muslims in Europe, 8 years younger than for all Europeans, 5 years younger for the religiously unaffiliated, and 10 years younger for the European Christians, the future of Europe looks pretty halal. Now, I know you guys don't just come to my channel to hear me read off statistics, so let's talk about how this happened.
And you can see that in the link below.
Christchurch terrorist uses as a justification for his attack. Many Kiwis were not interested in letting them share their racially divisive views, and the duo's speaking engagement was cancelled after large public protests. It was the news story of the day, and I wanted in. There was no great big plan, and I didn't know a lot about them or the issue.
If you're going to talk to these representatives, and of course, ultimately, you're going to amplify and provide them with a platform, you do need to be well versed in both their arguments and their strategies and how they do try to engage with the media, who they think are the enemy.
We might as well have a look at what went down that day. You say diversity is a weakness. Are you saying we're a weak country?
Will you accept the diverse view that women should be stoned for the crime of being raped?
Right. In that single sentence, you've got the possibility that you would support people who are going to be stoned as a form of punishment. See, that's not what multiculturalism is at all. So they've just redefined multiculturalism to be this threat, and this threat coming from Islam.
Now, what part of this don't you understand?
He's got a knife.
Friday afternoon, Auckland, New Zealand. A knife-wielding man went on a stabbing spree at a local supermarket. A total of 6 people were stabbed. 3 of them are in critical condition. New Zealand has labeled it a terrorist attack and is calling the attacker a violent extremist who was inspired by the ideology of the Islamic State. How did the attack unfold? Eyewitnesses filmed the chaos and panic inside the supermarket. The attacker appears to be running with a knife in his hand, frantically stabbing people on his way.
Oh my God.
Onlookers can be seen standing in disbelief as the violence takes place. It took about 60 seconds for the officials to put an end to this attack. He was shot and killed by the New Zealand police inside the mall. Now, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the suspect has been under police surveillance since 2016.
The attack began at 2:40 p.m. and was undertaken by an individual who was a known threat to New Zealand. The individual was under constant monitoring, and it was the police surveillance team and special tactics group who were part of that monitoring and surveillance that shot and killed him within, I'm told, the space of roughly 60 seconds of the attack starting.
Now watch how One News spin it.
This is the terrorist, Ahmed Samsudeen. We can now tell you in the lead up to this attack, officials were trying to revoke his refugee status and deport him, a process that dragged on for years.
Deportation is a long process generally. We have to bear in mind we're talking here about a person who had refugee status.
In 2013, he applied to stay in New Zealand as a refugee, saying he'd been kidnapped and tortured because he was Tamil, an ethnic minority.
You need to establish a well-founded fear of persecution, which is defined as a serious threat of harm for which you cannot get protection from your own country.
But in 2017, once he was on their radar for extremist views, officials uncovered this.
Some of the documents that he had used in order to get his refugee status looked to have been fabricated.
One News understands when police seized his laptop, they found he'd embellished a medical report and written fake letters from his family.
It is subjected to some pretty tough scrutiny, especially at appeal. They still can be fooled.
But yet again he appealed, and a gap in our law meant he couldn't be kept in jail while the appeal was taking place. So police used a squad of 30 people to monitor him around the clock for nearly 2 months, until Friday. Some are worried about what this means for refugees.
I myself have had to front our very Islamophobic and racist refugee policy for many years that have excluded people like myself from being able to resettle in New Zealand. That's something that we've had to fight for. And I just feel like events like this may potentially undo all of that.
Yeah, so there you go, folks. Muslims are the real victims here, not the people who got stabbed.
Now that we have this horrible act that took place yesterday that has pushed the situation in Afghanistan aside, especially for like family like mine who we're trying to bring here and bring refugee status.
I knew that I was in trouble. Let's talk about what you've been saying, which is that some races are genetically weaker than others.
Never said that. Give me your words. Give me your words. It's not what I say. This is the most established metric in social science is IQ.
Why did I let him carry on?
We have more and more of a multiracial society.
He has a firm belief in the significance and relevance of eugenics, which is an argument about the genetic purity and the need to improve the genes of a particular racial group. But then it was translated into political environments, such as Nazi Germany, where it became a scientific justification for the genocide of a people.
Knowing what's at stake, I actually personally find it distressing to watch this, knowing what came on March 15.
Yeah. Both of these guys would deny that they are involved with Nazis, that they are responsible for violence, that they contribute to hate crime and hate speech that you see around the world. But as far as I'm concerned, they provide the background, they provide the reasons, they provide the mandate for people who then do take it that extra step.
But I guess everything that I want to do in my career, you know, help inform people, make New Zealand a better place, all these kinds of things, like that day.
No, that was a fail.
Yeah, I failed.
Yes, Paddy, you failed big time. And folks, people like Paddy will keep on failing because they have this naive notion that all cultures are the same when they're not. And they allow them to immigrate into New Zealand and keep their cultures. Wake up, Paddy. People like you are responsible for last week's terrorist attack.